The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you. And today we have a great doubleheader episode for you. We're going to talk with Nick Redfern all about Slenderman, and has an internet creation kind of made the leap from an internet meme to a real life phenomena? We'll discuss with Nick. And secondly, we will have Matty Blake. He's going to talk about the Curse of Oak Island and his special dedicated to it. It's called Drilling Down. And we'll get to all of that right after this very brief favor we ask.
iPhone and iPad users, help us keep the Paranormal Podcast at the top of the charts. Go into your Apple Podcasts app right now and hit subscribe. We appreciate it. Now on to the show.
Well, today's topic is certainly something different. You might just think of it as an internet meme, but our guest today is going to tell us about the Slenderman mysteries. An internet urban legend comes to life that actually people are seeing Slenderman, having Slenderman experiences where we just thought it was an internet meme. Our guest is Nick Redfern. Now, of course, unless you've not been paying attention to this genre, you know Nick. Nick is the author of 40 books, according to this. I'm guessing it might be even more than that, including Immortality of the Gods, Weapons of the Gods, Bloodlines of the Gods, Monster Files, Memoirs of a Monster Hunter, The Real Men in Black, The NASA Conspiracies, The Pyramids in the Pentagon, The World's Weirdest Places, and many, many more. He has appeared on many TV programs, including the BBC's Out of This World, Sci-Fi Channel's Proof Positive, Ancient Aliens, and many more. Originally from the UK, Nick lives in Texas, and you can find his blog, World of Whatever, at nickredfernfortean.blogspot.com. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jim. How's it going?
It's going well. You're always one of our favorite guests, so I'm so glad to have you back on the show. Now, I think a lot of people just chalk up Slenderman as an internet meme, just as you said in the subtitle here, an urban legend. Why did you decide that it was worth examination? Isn't it just a tall tale concocted on the internet?
Well, that actually is what it was, but there was a strange development around about a year or so after the phenomenon, or if you like, the Slenderman was created. Now, to sort of understand the how and why I decided to write a book on it was purely and simply because people started to report, or claiming to report, to have seen the Slenderman in the real world. And then, of course, that provokes the question, well, how on earth could a fictional creature created specifically for the internet, how could that start suddenly being seen in and around the world by, people under just normal circumstances, just happen to see it, or they'd wake up in the middle of the night and it would be looming over them in the bedroom. And it was almost as if the fictional form had sort of strode out of the internet world into the domain of reality. Now, for people who aren't aware of what the Slenderman actually is, it was created in the summer of 2009 by a guy named Eric Knudsen. And basically what it was, there's a website called Something Awful, and they have these sort of competitions / challenges put out there just for entertainment's worth. And the ideas they came up in 2009 was for someone to come up with the best internet-based monstrous meme that they could come up with. And various people came up with numerous images of monsters and ghostly creatures and things like this. And Eric Knudsen created this entity which he designed as like a tall, thin humanoid figure, sort of 8 to 9 feet tall, with long, skinny arms down to its knees, tentacles coming out of its back, and a faceless face. There's no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just vague shadows where they should be. And he called it the Slenderman. And he uploaded a couple of photographs, used a couple of old black and white photographs, and interspersed on those pictures a couple of pieces of creepy artwork he designed of the so-called Slenderman. Now, I should stress this wasn't like a hoax or anything like that. It was just like almost like a humorous bit of internet fun. You know, let's just see who can come up with the weirdest, creepiest creature for the internet world. And the Slender Man was the one that really caught everybody's attention. And literally within days, weeks, there were forums about the Slender Man, chat rooms. Literally within a week or so, there was the beginnings of an ongoing online fictional show about the Slender Man called Marble Hornets, which has a tremendous following, huge following. And it stayed in that situation where it became something that fascinated sort of kids and teenagers. And it was sort of like an internet boogeyman, that kind of thing. Arguably the first real internet boogeyman that so many people were fixating on. And nothing out of the ordinary occurred for the first year or so. And it was just a case of people writing their own entertaining fictional stories of the Slender Man and posting their own pictures and photographs that they'd altered. And it was just meant as entertainment. But then, as I said, a year or so later, things changed when people then said they'd seen the Slender Man in the real world.
And that's what's amazing to me, the idea that it almost made the jump. It made the translation from being just something that is obviously made up to something that people are seeing for real. Now, I don't think we can have any discussion of this without talking about the case of those Milwaukee girls and what happened in that tragic case. I'm sure everybody's heard of it, but maybe you can refresh your memory as to what happened and really why the word Slenderman is pretty loaded and pretty infamous out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, it all started off as just a sort of cool bit of almost like a campfire type situation of, you know, people telling stories of the Slender Man. And
yeah, I know all about that. Yeah, the campfire show. Yeah.
And that's right, you do. And it was basically a case of it was entertainment and it was creepy entertainment, and you know, kids got sort of entranced by the stories. But what happened is that there was this angle where the interest and the entertainment angle slowly started to become, actually on the part of more than a few people, it became like an obsession, and it was taken very seriously. And you know, people added their own stories and ideas as to how the Slender Man was created. You know, we know how it was created, but they created fictional stories to go along with it as well. And people made sort of like fake government documents which suggested the government knew about the Slender Man. But again, this was all part of the fictional aspect of the story. It wasn't sort of deliberate hoaxing or anything like that. And from there, as I said, people got really obsessed with it, and to the point where the lines between fiction and fact became definitively blurred. And certainly the most graphic and sort of tragic example of this occurred on May the 31st, 2014, in the town of Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is like a suburb of Milwaukee. Now, the two girls in question, stabbed one of their former friends. The two girls were Anissa Weyer and Morgan Gazer, and the girl who was attacked was Peyton Leutner. Now, what happened was that, everything was totally normal. It was just, Waukesha's just a nice, pleasant, American town like any other one. And what happened was that the night before, which was Friday, May the 30th, 2014, the girls had a sleepover, just hanging out, having fun. And next morning had breakfast and went down to a local park. And what Peyton Luther didn't know was that the other two girls had actually planned on quite literally sort of sacrificing her to the Slender Man as a means to, in their own words, become the Slender Man's proxy. And they sort of lured her into one of the wooded areas in the local park in Waukesha. And she was actually stabbed almost 20 times. It's a miracle that she didn't die, because several of the stab wounds came very close to major organs and major arteries. And it was really just, the luck of the draw, so to speak, that she didn't die. And they fled the area, and Peyton Luton managed to sort of crawl to where there was like a pathway where, people would ride their bikes around the park. And luckily, a guy on a bike actually saw her and, raced over, and she said, "I've been stabbed." And the police obviously were quickly on the scene. And the girls had fled for a local forest, and they went on foot, which would have taken them hours to get there, because they believed the Slender Man had a creepy mansion deep within the woods. Now, of course, they were walking there. It didn't take any time at all for the police to catch up with them. And so they were soon, in custody, so to speak. And this really elevated the Slender Man mystery from just being an entertaining piece of fiction on the internet to where it became very graphically clear that people were believing in the Slender Man, and were even, in a worst case scenario, trying to sacrifice someone in his name. And so that's what happened. Now, of course, the police, the authorities, etc., took the down to earth view that this was just, this was a case of, people who'd gone across the line, that there was, the psychological issues going on, mental issues going on. And for that reason, there was a lot of sort of delicate procedures in terms of how the court case progressed. And it was finally wrapped up actually just a few weeks ago. And both girls, will now be essentially sort of behind closed doors, so to speak, for decades. They'll be even beyond middle age when they finally are released. And the main reason was because, it was perceived that they fully bought into all this. And so, in other words, it was a case of protecting everybody, the girls, and, the concern that how stable were they or not stable, and which, from the court's perspective, warranted that they needed to be, detained for however many years it's going to be. We know it's decades. So in other words, the story, or the incident, I should say, what it actually did, it achieved a situation where instead of the Slender Man just being something of interest to, 20, 30, 40,000 kids, it was now becoming an issue in relation to the mainstream media. And suddenly, over the course of that weekend, you had CNN, Fox News, MSN, everybody else covering this attack and the story. And every time there was a new development, it was on the mainstream news. And so what happened from there was that just about everybody had heard of the Slender Man. And that's the theory is, that kind of bolstered even more the belief system that the Slender Man wasn't just an internet meme, that it, in some weird supernatural fashion, it had sort of left the moorings of the internet behind and was now operating in the real world in kind of like a supernatural phantom-like fashion.
Now, and this is a tough question because I don't really think that I'm going to be able to answer it. Maybe you've got an idea. But the thing is that to me, this is a tough question for people like us who talk about these kind of things, about cryptids or strange supernatural creatures or those kind of things, because it's almost, when I see a story about Slenderman, I almost think that people who put out this kind of information in some ways, this kind of entertainment, are villainized because it's like, well, this stuff is floating around on the internet and it caused these girls to do this incredibly horrible thing. And it like vilifies those of us interested in the paranormal or the supernatural. For those of us who write about it or do podcasts or radio shows or whatever it may be, what is our role in something like this? Or is it just an unfortunate side effect? Is it like somebody going to see, I'll use an old movie, but like Dirty Harry, and deciding that they're going to carry around a Smith & Wesson and do vigilante justice or something? I mean, what if anything is our role in all of this?
Well, I think certainly with the case of the girls, I mean, the responsibility is on our part to report on it responsibly. And I have a 20-page chapter in the book on the attack that the girls carried out on their former friend. But what I've done is to write it in the same way that, your local newspaper or your local TV news would cover the story. I've done that. That chapter is done purely and simply from the facts and how the court case progressed and the different, situations that surfaced, and were the girls going to go to prison, because they could actually be tried as adults in Wisconsin under the laws there. Or would they be detained, in hospitals, that kind of thing. So I told the story in what I think is the best way, which is the down-to-earth facts. Now, beyond the facts of the attack, the rest of the story gets into very weird aspects, which are sort of definitively supernatural based, which allow us to sort of speculate on how, if true, the Slender Man can go from being an internet creation, a meme, to becoming something far more. So I think it's important, because of the situations and the controversies obviously surrounding the attack, we need to tread carefully and recognize that these are people who are all still living. It's not like we're telling a story from 500 years ago. So you have to be respectful and present the facts that we know. But when we get into the paranormal, then we can speculate more.
Well, we're going to speculate a little bit. After this, we're going to be back with Nick Redfern. The subject is his new book, brand new, The Slenderman Mysteries, an internet urban legend comes to life. And we'll be back with Nick right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, I want to ask you this. Have you ever found yourself in this scenario? Maybe you're a subscriber to one of the big streaming services out there, and they have great entertainment movies and things like that, but you're saying, hey, I want the kind of stuff I hear on Jim's shows. And you look and you look and you can't find anything that fits the bill. Well, you've been looking in the wrong place. You need to check out Gaia, because Gaia is the streaming service that is made for exactly the kind of content you hear on this show and so much more. And you can watch Gaia on all of your devices. There's Apple TV, your iPhone, your iPad, your Chromecast, your Roku, your Fire TV, your Android device, and so much more. If you're listening to this podcast, you can watch Gaia. Now, there's a lot of video on the internet, but a lot of it isn't that great because you don't know what the provenance is. You don't know where it comes from, but not with Gaia, no. Gaia is high-quality stuff, to use a technical term. Gaia creates, curates, and brings you the best in 40 topics on video, and Gaia explores the topics we love each and every week, and they always are bringing great new content. Here's some of what you're missing if you're not tuned into Gaia this week. George Norrie is back with Beyond Belief. This week he'll be talking about living a multi-dimensional life with Sarah Adams. Or you could check out Cosmic Disclosure. Emery Smith is going to take a look at alien tech at the Vatican. That looks like a really, really interesting program. Greg Braden continues with his Missing Link series, this idea of living in the simulation. And this week, the show is Life on the Other Side of the Simulation. The question is, what exists on the other side of our simulated reality? Could it be the proverbial heaven that so many spiritual traditions teach? What if the real world outside the simulation has endured a catastrophe and we're here to learn how to deal with it? Incredible stuff and very interesting. So here's how you get it. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim. Now, I've handpicked some shows here on UFOs, haunted places, and Bigfoot that I thought you might like, and you can watch those. And you don't have to log in or anything. You can watch them right there on the webpage. And then once you've done that, I'm sure you're going to agree that this is something you want to take advantage of. There's a little button, and you can sign up there for only 99 cents. 99 cents. You probably have that much in the cushions of your couch or in the cup holder in your car. So you got to give it a try. It's a great deal, and there's so much there. When it comes to renewal time, you're going to say, I'm not giving up my Gaia. I love it. So take advantage of the offer. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. I love it, and you'll love it. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is the ever-achieved, the erudite, the prolific author, Nick Redfern. He has turned his pen or his keyboard, I guess for the 21st century, to the Slenderman mysteries, and internet urban legend comes to life. And we just talked about how the Slenderman got started. Of course, that controversial and very sad case with those Milwaukee girls and everything that happened there. And now we're going to talk about some explanations. Now, you had made the point this was created and it was just like a contest. Let's create the strangest creature that we can, creepiest creature that we can create on the internet. And Slenderman was it. But in subsequent years, people have reported really seeing Slenderman. And you have a couple of different potential explanations for this. And first off, I'd like to talk about the idea of tulpas. Maybe you can fill people in if they've not heard about it. What is a tulpa, and how does that play into the Slenderman phenomenon?
Yeah, well, sure. The tulpa basically is a Tibetan term, which, in terms of translating it into English, the closest analogy is the term thought form. Now, the concept is that if enough people believe in something fictional, something that comes out of the imagination, but if enough people genuinely, strongly believe in it, that it can create like a real world equivalent of the fictional entity. In other words, the collective unconscious of hundreds of thousands of kids, teenagers who are obsessed with the Slenderman phenomenon. They're looking at pictures of it on the internet. They're taking part in forums and chat rooms. You know, they may have posters on their bedroom wall, reading books about it, talking about it, dreaming about it. The whole process of hundreds of thousands of people focusing on that image, the theory is that the human mind has the ability to externalize that imagery. And what happens is that you have this supernatural equivalent of what is in essence just a fictional creature, then being let loose in the real world in almost like a phantasm type fashion. But the extra part of the story, as it relates to the theories pertaining to tulpas, is that the stronger the belief in the entity, the more powerful and more corporeal and physical the tulpa, and in this case the Slenderman, the more powerful it gets, and the stronger the belief, the greater the strength. The greater the strength, the more it gets seen. The more it gets seen, the more people believe in it. So it's like has a complete spiraling effect. Now, this also ties in with something that's known as chaos magic, which I talk about in the book. Chaos magic is not like, a guy on stage pulling a rabbit out of a hat or anything like that. We're not talking that kind of magic. It's essentially an ancient form of magic upgraded for the modern era, where essentially you work with fictional archetypes, entities, and you try and again sort of nurture them into life by your imagination. Now, one of the examples I talk about in the book, which involves actually quite a well-known man, is a perfect example to explain how this works and what it implies. And it revolves around a guy named Alan Moore. And I tell the story in the book. Alan Moore is an English comic book artist, a very famous one, and writer as well. And he wrote or created the characters Constantine for the comic book, which turned into a movie with Keanu Reeves in the starring role. And in the movie and the comic books, Constantine is like a demon hunter, assassinating demons. And Alan Moore also created V for Vendetta, the comic book, which was turned into a hit movie.
Wow.
And yep. Alan Moore, when he was working on Constantine, the comic book, he was visualizing in his mind what Constantine should look like, what his face should look like, his hair, his build, his clothing, his mannerisms, everything. And he was sort of really focusing on this deeply. Now, at the height of this, when he was putting together the character, the imagery, Alan Moore was in a restaurant on the River Thames in London, England. And he's gone on record as saying that he literally saw the Constantine character coming towards him in the restaurant. And he said the man or figure or tulpa, however you want to term it, kind of gave him a sly, knowing, almost conspiratorial grin, but not a pleasant grin. But not a pleasant grin. And suddenly he was gone. And even to this day, Alan Moore is still, freaked out by that. And it's a very weird example, but a perfect example of how focusing on something which is absolutely fictional can actually cross over into the physical world and even possibly have some sort of independent existence from the creator. And as I said, the stronger it gets, the less it needs to rely upon the creator. And eventually it becomes like a spoiled kid that, demands its freedom. And then that's when problems sometimes start, where the creator then becomes a victim and the created entity becomes a predator.
And it seems like so many different kind of things could fall into this category. Things as far afield as the Greys. Things like just yesterday, and I'm not sure if it'll be out by the time we talk about this. I don't know which show's coming out first, but talk to David Weatherly about black-eyed kids. Some people talk about the Jinn. It seems like this idea of tulpas could explain a whole vast array of phenomena, maybe not just Slenderman.
Well, yeah, I think, you bring up the matter of the black-eyed children. I think that's a perfect example. I mean, there were some original, early reports of the black-eyed kids in the 1990s, but certainly, the figures have shot up in more recent years. And it wouldn't surprise me at all because of the Slenderman. Not just the name, Slenderman and Black-Eyed Children. It's not just the name. The name itself is enough to turn people's heads, But it's also the imagery where the Slenderman, you have this tall, skinny figure in a black suit and pale skin and no hair, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. long spidery arms and these tentacles on its back. And then with the black-eyed kids, they're sort of pale, black-eyed, black hoodies pulled down, knocking on people's doors late at night. Just like the Slender Man, it sounds like like I said earlier, a campfire urban legend story. Both of those fall into that category, like definitively weird, sinister urban legends. And that's what they were, I think. But both of them, I suspect, have now become sort of tulpified, if you like, if that's a real word, which it isn't. But I mean, it gets to the point. And I think that's what's happened with the black-eyed children as well, that there may well have been a genuine phenomenon, but it's now been multiplied by a second version in terms of the tulpas. So it's the same with the Slender Man. You have the original fictional creation, and you're not giving life to the internet creation itself. You're creating a second version of the Slender Man. The one on the internet isn't self-aware. It isn't anything paranormal itself. What's happened is that a carbon copy, if you like, has been created, and it's that one that is the dangerous one.
The idea of the tulpa, it actually strikes me as kind of a cousin to the idea of something like The Secret and manifestation. If you think about people who say, if you think good thoughts and the universe hears it, and you put it out there that I'm going to be successful and I'm going to be accomplished, that can help grease those wheels. Some people believe you can wish for the Mercedes in the driveway and it'll somehow appear. I don't buy into that, but I do tend to think if you're positive and you think that I'm going to be successful at the outset of a project and you work hard, that it's more likely. Is it possible that there's like one we associate with the good, the manifestation piece. This we kind of associate with the sinister, but could they be working on similar rules in the universe?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a great deal to the idea of positive energy and negative energy, and what you put out there, can come back depending on the way you interpret something. If you get up every morning and you expect it to be bad, well, sometimes that happens, and I think we all know people who have runs of bad luck or ill health, and things just happen to them, and it's almost like, how could so much happen to one person? But it does. And I think there is something to that angle now, which that ties in with the Slender Man as well, because not only is the Slender Man sort of in existence because people believe in it, but the theory is that tulpas exist or can continue to exist because people believe in them. In other words, it's the belief that sustains them. So if you are of that negative mindset, or you're fascinated by the Slender Man but fearful of it, what it's going to do is get its claws, metaphorically, even more into you, because your mindset is perhaps based around fear, and that fear drives the belief. So in other words, the Slender Man may manifest for people purely and simply so it can elevate the belief system and then essentially feed on that belief. So it's kind of like the old analogy, be careful of what you wish for. You wish for the Slender Man, and it comes. And when it comes, what it does then is to demonstrate to you that, hey, I exist. And then the person then, if they're particularly vulnerable, is going to be essentially, ensnared. And from there, it's a case of literally sort of bleeding dry the person of their belief, and then repeating encounters, and the belief gets stronger. Then the belief is pulled in by the Slender Man, and again, it's like a spiraling effect. That in many respects, the Slender Man is like so many other tulpas. It's like a parasite. It clings onto us because although it's becomes independent, it clings onto us as a means to fuel itself, in other words.
And how do people describe the Slender Man? I mean, what's the most common description of what he looks like, what he acts like?
Well, I mean, the main thing, is sort of impossibly tall. We're talking about 8 to 9 feet tall, extremely skinny. The arms and the legs are sort of like spidery almost, they're that skinny. And it wears a black suit, a white shirt, and a thin black tie. And in that respect, it's not too dissimilar to a lot of the weirder Men in Black type stories. Yep. Now, what's interesting, just as a quick aside, Eric Knudsen, who created the Slender Man, was actually inspired by a lot of supernatural creatures in the supernatural real world to create the Slender Man. For example, he was inspired by the stories of the Men in Black. Also, an early MIB type character that became known as the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Mattoon being a little town in Illinois where this strange character in black was seen roaming around town in the 1940s. And so, in other words, I find that intriguing that Eric Knudsen, was using not just fictional stories to conjure up the image of the Slender Man, but also he was relying on some of the things we research, paranormal creatures. So you had all these different things blending together in terms of his physical appearance with the black suit, the skinny limbs, and but he also added the touch of these sort of flickering tentacles coming out of its back, like octopus tentacles. That probably stems from the fact that Knudsen actually said that he was also heavily inspired by the work of H.P. Lovecraft. And if you've read any of Lovecraft, a lot of his tales are of sort of octopus-type creatures like Cthulhu and, similar ones and, half fish, half human people in stories like Dagon and things like that. So that was clearly part of the inspiration as well. So, but just that image, the black suit, I think, and the black tie kind of provokes in some people like an authority figure, like the FBI knocking on the door, right, that kind of thing. And I think you put all those issues together, the kind of controlling factor that the Slender Man has, its creepy appearance, the fact that it torments children and it often it's seen lurking in forests and woods. You put all that together, the imagery, not just of the creature, but its actions, then you can really understand how and why the image of it really did kind of just pull people in like a magnet. They were so entranced and almost hypnotized by the way it looked, that nobody had seen anything like this before. And again, I think that has a substantial role to play in how not just the development of it, but how that development literally went stratospheric. It was in no time at all. You had literally tens and tens of thousands of people all talking about this on the internet within less than a week of, the Something Awful contest going ahead.
When we get back, I want to hear maybe one of your favorite stories of Slender Man. And also, I'd like to talk about another theory, which may actually be more scary than the whole idea of tulpas. We'll be back with Nick Redfern right after this. Are you a Kindle fan? Do you like to do a lot of Kindle reading? Well, I have some exciting news for you. If you are a member of Amazon's Kindle Unlimited program, and you'll probably know if you are, you can read any of my 5 campfire books for absolutely free. Yes, for free. And it does help us out a lot, even when you read them for free. So if you're a Kindle Unlimited member, go over to Amazon and be sure to check out all of my True Ghost Story campfire books. And as a KU member, you'll be able to read them for free. Check it out, and thanks so much. We are back with Nick Redfern. The subject, The Slender Man Mysteries, an internet urban legend comes to life. It is the new book by Mr. Nick Redfern, and we're talking all about Slender Man. And we discussed one of the big theories out there, the idea that Slender Man is a thought form, and it is a tulpa that comes to life because we kind of conjure it up in our thinking. There's a I think an even more frightening possibility is the internet getting a mind of its own and becoming self-aware and making these things reality, possibly, Nick?
Well, yeah, that's one of the popular theories, not just in relation to the Slenderman, but in relation to the internet period. The idea that as the internet becomes more and more massive, so to speak, digitally speaking, and on top of that, more and more data, more and more progress, more research being done into things like artificial intelligence, and sort of the idea of one day creating sort of self-aware computers, if you like. And it's surprising. It actually surprised me when I was doing the research for this particular chapter, how many people in the scientific world do kind of suspect that the internet, as if you view it as like a unified entity, is slowly, bit by bit, becoming self-aware. Now, although we don't have proof of this, one of the things that I found in doing the research was that a number of people who were fascinated and obsessed with the Slenderman had weird experiences in relation to their, whether their iPhone, their laptop, whatever device we're talking about. Now, one of the people I interviewed for the book was a girl named Lacey, and she's a trainee flight attendant. And I interviewed her specifically for the book, and she told me how she got into the Slenderman mystery not long after it all took off. And by her own admittance, she said that she kind of really got obsessed with all this. It wasn't just an interest or a fascination. I mean, it kind of took over her life, and she spent hours on the internet, sort of, just looking around and reading all the latest entertaining fictional stories, printing off photographs, from the internet and artwork, and framing them in her living room. And I think at one point she had like 16 or 17 framed images of the Slenderman in her apartment in various rooms. And she told me that at the height of all this, weird stuff started to happen with her laptop. She said that on one occasion, she was about to put it into sleep mode when she saw what she said was clearly a shadowy version of the Slenderman from head to toe, so to speak, on the screen. And then it kind of flickered and was gone. But she said it was clearly the Slenderman. He had like the long arms down to the knees, and the black suit. And, she was terrified. Now, the second time it happened again, it was a bit more substantial. And then finally, with the third one, she said that this sort of creepy, gravelly voice said, "Now we're friends." And again, there was like a flickering image of the Slenderman. Now, this sort of provoked stories like this, and I've actually got sort of 6 or 7 like that now that relate to, kind of like the internet and the Slenderman coming together and digitally attacking, whoever. There are sort of 2 scenarios here. One is that the internet itself, as I said, coming self-aware, and, the more time somebody spends on one particular issue on the internet, the theory is that the internet itself begins to understand that this person or that person is concentrating on a specific thing. And then essentially the internet is starting to respond in relation to the thing that the person is focusing on the internet. The other theory is the idea that the Slenderman, the Tulpa version, as sort of as a phantom-like entity, has found a way to sort of worm its way into the internet. In other words, it's not the internet doing it; it's the Slenderman having the ability to manipulate our technologies. So you have 2 very controversial theories, but I talk in the book about a number of highly respected people in the scientific world who actually do now suspect that there's something going on where there is a degree of self-awareness and development in the same way that animals and people develop, and how we, our minds process things, and we process them better and better as, we get more data. And that's kind of the analogy with it, really.
And that's fascinating. But so, I mean, if I have a coffee cup here and it just sits there, it doesn't become self-aware. So what is the mechanism? It seems like you would think that the internet is inanimate. So what is the mechanism for it becoming self-aware and starting to generate these things, do you think?
That's the big question. And that, I won't say it's so much that it's a flaw as such, but what I would say, it's more along the lines of a theory. Now, one of the interesting things that has come forward is that there have been a number of occasions where people have been using their laptop and perhaps something's running slow. I know this sounds like really weird, but it's running slow, whatever. And the person sort of screamed or swore at the laptop, and then suddenly they've lost all internet access. And it's almost as if it's responded to the person's rant by saying, well, screw you, so to speak. I'm going to make it even more difficult for you. And you can actually find a couple of forums online where a lot of people came forward and said they'd had very similar experiences, where it was almost, you had to sort of just say, well, sorry, I didn't mean it, and that kind of thing, where it was as if the internet was, playing kind of like a sinister game with the people and demonstrating who's the boss, so to speak. And I kind of talk about in the book the analogies with in the 2001: A Space Odyssey movie, the computer named Hal, who becomes so self-aware that he kind of sees everybody as a threat and becomes like this deranged, murderous, computerized entity which doesn't really exist, but over time he does become more and more self-aware. And so that is kind of the the theory of it all. And granted, it is a theory, and but it's an interesting one. I mean, for example, when it comes to this issue of the internet being self-aware, one of the sort of interrelated theories is the idea that we're living in a computerized world, not unlike the Matrix. But we're living in we all think we're living in a real world, but we're living in sort of a computerized dream world, not too dissimilar to the Matrix, in the Matrix movies. Now, one of the people who's actually talked about this, very well-known figure, I'm sure you'll know the name, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, his exact words are, in terms of could we be living in some sort of Matrix dream world / computer world, he said, I think the likelihood may be very high. If that's the case, it's easy for me to imagine that everything in our lives is just a creation of some other entity for their entertainment. So in that sense, you've got somebody of Tyson's caliber saying that, maybe there is sort of a Matrix world and we don't realize it because we're all plugged into it and it seems so real. But, it's like they say in I think one of the characters says in the Matrix, have you ever had a dream that was so real that if you didn't wake up, how would you know it was a dream? We've all had those dreams that seem so real. And then you wake up and you're like, thank goodness it was just a dream. But when you're dreaming it, you absolutely were sure it was real. So this angle of the internet kind of interacting with us in strange ways, and in a way that seems beyond coincidence, where things go wrong, and then you have digital images of the Slenderman responding to someone who becomes obsessed with the Slenderman. then you have a really weird situation, which sort of brings to mind, what is reality? Do we know what reality really is? And how does that tie in with the idea of an internet that may have some degree of intelligence,
Well, it's a mind-blowing conversation, and we've only scratched the surface, and there's so much to think about and to talk about. And I just talked to Dr. Raymond Moody, and that'll be on soon. Of course, the guy behind the whole NDE research and really invented the term. And he said one of his favorites is Plato's allegory of the cave, and I couldn't agree more, because I think we're in a cave. And we're seeing these flickering shadows and trying to make sense of it. And somebody that tries to help us make sense of it and covers so much of it is Nick Redfern. Nick, where can people find the Slenderman mysteries and info on everything that you do?
Well, the book's available online at Amazon, and you can also buy it off the shelves in Barnes & Noble. And people can reach me at my blog, which is World of Whatever. The address, nickredfern14.blogspot.com, or my Twitter account, Nick Redfern UFO. Reach me there, and also on Facebook as well.
Well, he's one of our favorite guests. It was so good to have him with us. Nick Redfern, thank you for joining us today to talk about the Slenderman mysteries and internet urban legend comes to life. Well, that was certainly a fascinating discussion with Nick, something I would have never thought of. I thought it was just a meme, but I guess the reports are indicating otherwise, and we'll have to stay tuned. That idea of tulpas, absolutely fascinating to me. And next up, we have Matty Blake. We're going to talk all about the Curse of Oak Island and his recent special dedicated to it called Drilling Down. Now, a quick programming note here. We got delayed a couple of days on the release of this. We're actually releasing it on March 15th. So during the interview, you will hear us say that Drilling Down is going to be on tonight. Now, the original airing was on March 13th, but I have checked, and the show is still available on demand. Looks like it's going to be available for some time on demand. So you're certainly going to want to check out that and any repeats you may see. So my apologies to Matty and the crew. We just had some life got in the way of getting the podcast out on Tuesday today, or this week, and I apologize. But do look for Drilling Down in your on-demand listings and any repeats that may air on History. Thank you so much. And now on to Matty Blake, a fascinating and interesting guy. Matty, as you'll be able to tell from his voice, he also co-hosts a daily FM radio show called Matty and Nick on legacy Boston rock station WAAF. He's a versatile actor, writer, comic, and host who has appeared in many films, TV shows, and over 20 national network commercials. He's also a sought-after voiceover talent with a long list of national clients. And he is truly a Renaissance man because he's also the co-founder of the Monsterland Task Force, a research and support group for those who report unexplained experiences in New England. Matty, welcome to the program today.
Jim, I'm a huge fan of yours, so this is a thrill for me. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, and I love what you do and how you do it, man. I've learned a lot from your interviewing style, actually.
Oh, gee. Well, thank you. That's very kind coming from a real pro there. That's great. I'm glad you listen, and thank you so much. That's a great compliment and very flattering. I got to ask you, you're a radio guy. How in the world did you get into this paranormal stuff? Did the radio come first, then the paranormal, or did the paranormal come before the radio?
Yeah, no, paranormal came from when I was a child on through my life. And I'm not even a radio guy. I'm playing one right now for the past year. I'm an actor, comic, writer, host guy. And the radio show was offered to me a year ago. Although I had done some radio stuff through the comedy world years before.
Sure.
I was offered my own show a year ago here in Boston. And I just, you ride the horse in the direction the horse is riding in the career of show business.
Sure, absolutely.
But when I was a kid, my grandmother used to tell she had a ghost in her kitchen, and she talked about it like she was talking about the weather, and she had a name for it, Bridget. So I grew up with paranormal all around me and never really thought of it. Like a kid who grows up in Europe and is introduced to wine at an early age. When he goes to college, he doesn't freak out and start drinking booze all the time because he's been exposed to it, And that's how I was. Like, I just assumed there was another world that we couldn't see. And then when I was about 10 or 11, I had a precognitive dream. This sounds silly, but I had a pet parakeet that I loved very much. I had a great connection with. And I had a dream that night, one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had in my life, that something happened to him. And I was chasing through the empty halls of my school, and I found him, and he was still and lifeless. And I was screaming and running through the halls. And when I woke up, relieved I was in a dream, like, oh, thank God, I looked over his cage, and he was dead at the bottom of the cage. So that kind of, set me on a course of what's going on in the world that we can't see. And I've been lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on your perspective, to have several paranormal encounters since that time. I had an apparition in my 20s where I saw the form of a boy who had passed on at a home I was working at. So I'm very attuned to the paranormal, and I'm very, very sympathetic to those people who have experiences but feel too embarrassed to talk about them. So I try to, through podcasts like your own or whatever media outlet I can, and even drilling down sometimes, I try to bring up aspects of the paranormal and the spooky things so that people who feel like they're hiding a story can talk about it.
I think that's so important, because it used to be, in some circles it still is, if someone has an experience, the thought is, oh, that person, there's something wrong with them, they're crazy. But the truth is, if you delve deep enough, if you drill down, almost everybody's had an experience. Is that what you've found?
100%. Like I heard you the other day telling a beautiful story about hearing I believe it was your uncle's name.
Yes.
At a thing. Look, there's two ways to live life. Like, you can be the skeptic, cynic guy, and that's fine, or gal. I just know for me, I've kind of lived on both sides of that bridge, because I did go through a phase of like, oh, it's all BS. I wanted everyone to think I was intellectual and smart. So it's all fantasy we make up. But I can tell you, there's just too many things. Too many people have too many experiences. Too many credible people. There's an area here in Massachusetts where people have a lot of Bigfoot encounters. And I've had, law enforcement officials, park ranger, get emotional telling me about his Bigfoot experience. I mean, I get emotional even talking about his experience that I wasn't part of. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, he's not lying. You might be able to scientifically explain what he saw, but he ain't lying.
Right.
So yeah, I think if you dig deep enough, everybody's got something.
So how did you get involved with the Curse of Oak Island?
Well, again, in my childhood, I had a book. I think it was called Strange Mysteries from Around the World. I forget the author's name. And in it was a little tale of this island that supposedly had treasure buried on it. And it fascinated me so much that I had my mother buy me Treasure Island. And she used to read it to me at night. And then I forgot about it for a long, long time. And it was just as simple as my agent called me and said, hey, we have this audition, but one of the prerequisites of the audition is that the host, whoever it's going to be, has to know about kind of that alternative news world. And he knew I was into that stuff. And he goes, I think you're my guy. So I went in, and it just, probably bored them with all my knowledge of the paranormal and high strangeness. Got the job. But, here's another paranormal aspect of this, Jim, that I don't often tell, but I'll keep it as short as I can. I had a family history in Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. I had a distant relative, my grandmother's grandfather came to Ireland through Nova Scotia, and there was an incident. And so I was researching that in my 20s. And 2 days before my agent called me with that audition, I said to my wife out loud, I said, I've been having dreams about Nova Scotia. I think we should go back and do more on that family history of mine. And she goes, yeah, I'd love to go back. It was beautiful. I said, yeah, we should go back to Nova Scotia, Canada. And then 48 hours later, my agent called me and said, I have an audition for you, but it's paranormal and you have to go to Nova Scotia, Canada. So,
no problem.
Yeah. So another, hey, look, you could call that a coincidence, or you could say maybe something else is going on and I was kind of supposed to be on that island. And now I feel fully, after, 4 seasons working on this thing, I feel fully that I was meant to be there.
And for people who maybe, a lot of people listening are going to know exactly what Oak Island is and then watch the show. But maybe there's a few people out there who haven't been able to tune in. Explain to us a little bit of the story of Oak Island, because I think it's so fascinating.
It really is. So basically, it's a real life grown-up version of Goonies. For those who are familiar with that movie. For over 222 years, people have been trying to figure out what may be buried underneath Oak Island. Somebody, it appears, long ago and at great effort and great skill, took the time to create an underground series of chambered vaults that are booby-trapped. We don't know why, we don't know who, and we don't know what they buried, but there are theories galore. And unfortunately, 6 people have died over the years, over that 222 years, searching for this treasure. It's a very dangerous undertaking. The most recent hunters are brothers Rick and Marty Lagina. They're from northern Michigan, and they have been looking for this treasure for about 10 years now, I think. So the show on History Channel chronicles their search to try and finally figure out what's underneath Oak Island.
I just saw something the other day that reminds me of this, and I want to run it by you, and I can't remember the name of it. And I bet you were a fan of this show, Unsolved Mysteries. And I was watching some old Unsolved Mysteries around one of the streaming channels. And they were talking about this place where there had been this cipher. And the name of it's on the tip of my tongue, and I can't remember a cipher that was from the 1800s. And they showed these gentlemen who were searching for it. And this was probably, I think show was made in 88 or something like that. So 30 years ago. And this guy's in his 50s or 60s. And he's like, I'm going to find it. I'm the one that's going to find it. And, he could very well be off the face of the earth now. You kind of think he not threw away, but he abandoned everything else in his life and went and hunt for treasure and probably ended up with nothing. When you're dealing with something like that, I mean, as tantalizing and fascinating as it is, do you ever think that maybe you're just chasing your tail and chasing a vapor that whether it does or doesn't exist, you'll never figure it out?
First of all, you've cued me to do my Robert Stack impression because you mentioned Unsolved Mysteries. So
yes,
let me give you a little bit.
Okay,
ready?
Here we go.
All right, here we go. If you or someone you know knows the whereabouts or location of the Oak Island treasure, call Unsolved Mysteries now. How's that?
Yeah, excellent. What is it? The mystery you solved? Maybe yours. I can't remember what the tagline was.
I never forget his tagline. I forgot it at the last second.
He was so good. He was so good at that.
He's the best. That's a great question, and to answer it succinctly, yes, it's a huge part of the show. It's a huge theme of the show. Is how much of a life is, I hate to use the word wasted if you want to look at it like that. I mean, you've got 2 families on that island, the Blankenships and the Nolans, that were like the Hatfields and McCoys. Dan Blankenship came to that island as a successful contractor and has stayed there for decade after decade, pouring money into a hole, it's fair to say. Now, the other way to look at it is that it's a mystery and you're trying to solve a wonderful mystery, and it's created all kinds of opportunities around it. But there is no doubt, and I know for a fact, Marty and Rick, I've talked to them about it on Drilling Down, so it's not like I'm giving up any secrets here. I've asked them, do you ever worry that this is all for naught? And Marty, early on especially, Marty Lagina would say, like, of course, of course I do. How much is too much? And so that is always on their mind. There's a giant, the way I like to think about it, Jim, is there's like a giant clock, and a giant pit of money hanging over their heads at all time. And the clock is running and the money keeps pouring into the hole. And, the more that goes on that they're not finding things, those things are probably weighing on them heavier and heavier every year. That being said, this season 5, has been phenomenal. And in my opinion, it has re-energized the search. They found over 600 artifacts in season 5 that are categorized. So I think now there's a renewed energy, and some of that kind of, geez, are we wasting our time here? I think that's really gone away this season.
And it's one of those things where you could imagine, let's say that they come to the storehouse or the place, the vault or whatever it is, the proverbial vault, and they open it. And, on one hand, it's like that scene from National Treasure, right? Or on the other hand, it's like that scene from Geraldo Rivera's Al Capone special. It's an empty bottle. I mean, it's got to be, it's got to be fascinating, frustrating, exciting, all those things rolled into one. And I've got to believe that's the reason that you guys decided to do Drilling Down. Tell us about Drilling Down.
Yeah, it was born of the fan demand, basically. Like History Channel is getting so many questions and so much email about this show, more than any other of their properties in a way. So they said, "My God, we need to do more here. We need to give them more." And so people just have so many questions, so many theories. There are all these theories about what's down there, and people love to give their theory and discuss why their theory is the one. So I look at my job, Jim, as a representative of the fans. When I'm on the island, I try to take everything I see in the fan sites, and believe me, they are the fans of Oak Island are very involved. They know every little thing. They will take screen captures from the show and say, well, look at the position of this and why was that there and this isn't there anymore. So I try to take all of that, all of their theories, and walk onto the island with it. It's impossible to get to it all, but I try to be their voice to the brothers and say, okay, have you thought of this? What about this? And hopefully I'm doing an okay job at that.
Now, when you're on the island, do you feel some kind of mystic energy? Is it just a straight, in your view, just a straight, hey, we're looking for this treasure? Or do you get some kind of creepy, weird feeling that there's something else, some other level to all of this?
Well, I definitely am in the camp of, although, Curse of Oak Island is not a paranormal show per se, even though you look at the graphics of it and the name of it, The Curse of Oak Island, lends itself to that. It's really a show about family and faith and even technology, how they dig the stuff and the equipment, and people who love engineering love the show. It's a family show. It's a science show. But it's an undeniable fact that weird and strange things happen on Oak Island. And I, as I mentioned earlier, have a sensitivity to the paranormal. So there is no doubt I have had at least a half a dozen experiences on the island. I feel it when I go on the island, especially at night. Let me give you a quick example. Marty Lagina, who was the team's skeptic, probably up until season 5 this season, he just thought it was all hogwash. All these stories of, crew getting spooked. Anytime I brought up anything that I felt, they're just like, it's hogwash. And, show me. I'm a scientist. I'm scientifically minded. Show me. And he went out one night on kind of a dare from his brother Rick, and within 2 minutes got in his truck and sped off the island at a high rate of speed. And I asked him about it, and he said, I was completely spooked. His actual quote, Jim, was, I felt unsafe. And I said, what was it? And he said, I can't talk about that. I just know I had to get off the island in that moment. So when you have someone who's that much of a skeptic, and like I've heard you on your show, on this podcast, talk about, when you talk about witnesses and you talk about, I think you were talking about the Mothman in a previous episode, the people of West Virginia, those people, and not to generalize, but they're salt of the earth, grounded, hardworking people. And you take a guy like Dave Blankenship, Dan's son, who lives on the island. He is a no BS, straight shooter as they come. As a matter of fact, we have to beep him out all the time because he swears so much. He's just, he does not suffer fools. He does not like flights of fancy. He does not like fanciful tales. He admitted on my show that he basically saw a UFO. You can search it. You can go on YouTube and search Dave Blankenship, Matty Blake drilling down, and you will find a clip of season 1 of my show, Drilling Down, in the studio in New York City. He admits seeing, as he says, a ball of fire go over the water and over the island and then take off at a high rate of speed. And I said, is it fair to say you saw a UFO encounter? And he said, I don't know what the F it was, so you tell me. So yeah, Oak Island is full of paranormal activity, and I feel it every time I'm on the island.
There is another possibility I want to run by you. When we think of these things, for example, when people look at the prophecies of Nostradamus, or they look at something like the Voynich manuscript, or they look at something like this, there's the thought that maybe this is just some kind of twisted practical joke, an ancient one, no less, but some kind of just something made up out of whole cloth, just for whatever reason, like a colossal goof. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think anything's a possibility. But what I would categorize that as, it could be a diversion. I wouldn't call it a practical joke because nobody let's say, okay, so this season they found something that they found an artifact across that they believe could be pre-13th century. You're talking medieval times. So let's just say, for sake of argument, that whatever happened prior to 1795, the discovery of the money pit, which is kind of when all this started, let's say pre-1795, but after Middle Ages, let's say something in the 1600s, let's say. Someone did something on the island, that much construction. I mean, you're talking 200 feet deep chambered vaults that are booby trapped. We can't even try and dig a hole. Good luck getting to 10 feet, with the equipment they had at that time. So if someone did something and there's nothing there, I think the most you could say about it was a diversion to take people's attention away from the actual thing that they're hiding, wherever that may be.
Wow.
Do you follow?
Yeah. That's a pretty wild thought that they would go to all the problem to create a diversion. So then it makes it even more tantalizing. What in the world would they take all this effort to divert from?
Right. And there's precedent for that. There's like the Solomon's Temple. So on Oak Island, they found platforms every 10 feet and then a stone at 90 feet. And according to one researcher, if you look at Solomon's Temple, it's built with that same model. And what they would do is when you got to say like 90 or 100 feet, they would have a treasure there, a temporal treasure, gold, whatever. But off that vault would be a tunnel. And that tunnel would lead to what they were really hiding. So whoever the treasure hunter was would think, oh my God, I found gold and rubies. But really what's down the hall is, say, the menorah, the Ark of the Covenant, or a religious handwritten document by one of the apostles, whatever it might be. So that could be a possibility that this is a big ruse and that we think it's the money pit, but then it's chambered off into somewhere else on the island or some other island, maybe even, who knows. But yeah, to say a practical joke, I would say it's almost impossible that someone will go through this much work for a practical joke or a lark, but they might do it to throw someone off the scent.
So drilling down, tell us about when we can watch it, what we can expect. And I know you mentioned it's because just fans wanted more information. So you're kind of carrying that out for them. So what form does it take? When can we watch it? And all of that good stuff.
All right. Yeah. Well, I think it's tonight, right?
Yes.
Tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central on History. Basically, what I'm going to try to do, as I said earlier, is go onto the island, sit with the brothers. And by the way, shout out to Prometheus and to the brothers Lagina, because they give me such incredible access, Jim. They basically tell me nothing's off limits. Like, go, what do you want? And so I'm going to try to find out from them, is there anything we didn't see in season 5 that we need to know about? What do these things mean? Because when you're watching a show, Jim, you're watching this narrative and you're caught up in the narrative. What's going to happen next? And it's hard to then take the 600 artifacts that they found and put them in some sort of timeline or context. And that's exactly what me and the brothers are going to try and do. We're going to sit down, lay these things out on the table, and go through what could this all mean? What theory are we looking at here? And then finally, I'm just going to try and drag it out of them. Is there going to be a season 6? Because
there you go.
I want there to be. Yeah.
Big question. Well, I know also if people don't catch it tonight, I'm sure it'll be on demand and they'll be able to access it via their cable system or whatever. But I love puzzles, so this is a great thing. I think it's fascinating, and I love the fact that you are bringing in science and kind of serving many different needs at the same time. I think that's really cool.
Well, thanks, Jim. And I think that's exactly the type of fan that I love to talk to. Is there are people who are obsessed with the treasure. And then there are people who are obsessed with the journey. Like Rick Lagina always says, and I'm the same way. I don't spend a lot of time on Oak Island thinking about gold and rubies or whatever, diamonds. I think about who the hell did this and why. So it's like you said, it's unraveling the mystery. And I think if you can enjoy the show like that, it'll be a much more enjoyable experience for you.
In learning about Oak Island and so forth, what surprised you the most, or how has it changed your viewpoint about these type of things? Has it changed? It's not paranormal per se, but how has it? What has it brought to you, and maybe your thinking on these subjects?
It's a great question. It was a life changer. Being part of a small part of the team as they say, and has been a life changer. It's opened me up to all kinds of possibilities about everything. It's made me become almost kind of a investigative journalist, which is a part of my career I never had. Look, I'm a comedian actor by trade, you know, and I've had to research this very carefully so I could talk to someone like you in a forum like this. And it also has, you know, what's funny, Jim? I'm realizing this as you asked the question. It's kind of softened me to the skeptics also, because I'm so into the paranormal, as I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you are as passionate about it as I am.
Sure.
And when someone was skeptical, I would immediately go like, oh God, Mr. Skeptic, here he is, you know. But in the journey of this island, I have been guilty of jumping to conclusions too fast because I'm so excited by the process. So it has reined me in. It has made me more skeptical in a way, which is funny because I still believe. I'm still very much a believer, but I'm much more procedural and scientific in how I go about things. So there's been several times where I've held an artifact in my hands and looked at Rick or Marty and gone like, this must mean this because this and this. And they go, well, wait a second, slow down because we don't know because this and this. I go, yes. So it's changed me for the better. I think I'm a better able to talk about these subjects now because of my Oak Island training, as it were.
You know, that's so interesting that you mention it because I feel very similarly about doing these podcasts in that, you know, before I started the podcast, which gosh, I'm starting to get afraid to say how long I've been doing this because it's starting to date me since 2005. But the point is that before that, I would see an article or something UFO sighted. I'm like, aha, proof. Yeah. And now when I see something like that, it's like, well, what was the air traffic in the area? And the more you delve into, so what I often say is doing what I do, and it's probably the same for you, is made me more convinced than ever that there are strange things going on. I'm more convinced than ever. I'm more convinced there's something to UFOs. I'm more convinced that there's something to the afterlife and ghosts and various supernatural and paranormal topics. However, it makes me more skeptical, that's a new word, skeptical about any one individual case. And it sounds exactly like what you're describing.
Absolutely. It's making it, your skepticism is actually making the stories that count more important. I met a guy, Father Benedict Rochelle, he's passed away. He was a Catholic priest, and he was involved in investigations of miracles for the Catholic Church. And I remember him telling me that on the team that investigated miracles, and they also did, possessions, investigations, things like that. He told me that on that team, there were secular doctors, actually non-believing secular atheist doctors. And I thought, why would you put a doctor? And he said, well, the worst thing we could do is say that something was real and then have it be fake. And because then everything we said from then on would be completely non-belief. So we came at it from we tried to prove it was not divine. We tried to prove it wasn't a demon, or we tried to prove it wasn't a miracle to the best of our ability so that we didn't say something was real when it wasn't. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. As people who are passionate about the subject, if we go screaming from the mountaintops, this happened, this must mean it's real, and it's not, that sets us back 5 feet, or 5 steps, 5 steps back, 1 step up.
Right. I think like so many things in life, moderation, Yeah. So sometimes I describe myself as a skeptical believer. But to your point earlier, when I do my campfire show, people call in, they're so sincere, and I believe them. People say, well, do you think people are putting you on? And yeah, maybe occasionally. I've been doing that show for the last 9 years now. And occasionally, yes, occasionally, but very occasionally, almost universally, I think people are being sincere. Now, there may be cases where they think they've experienced something paranormal and there is a logical explanation. Obviously, we couldn't investigate all the cases that call in. But there's some cases that people bring forth that it's like, well, there are two, and I'll say this to them. There are two possibilities. And I'll give you the first one, and it doesn't mean I believe this, but A, you're lying, or B, it's supernatural. Because some of them are so, out there. And I said, by the way, I don't believe A, because I think hopefully over the years, you become a good judge of character talking to so many people about these things. And you could tell when maybe somebody's having a little bit of fun or maybe remembering something they saw in a movie, and when they're really, really very sincere about it. It's fascinating stuff, and it's an endless journey, much like the search for treasure on Oak Island. So, Matty, one more time, where can people see this this program you're doing, Drilling Down?
Tonight, we wrap up season 5, Tuesday, March 13th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. If you miss it, you can go to History Channel, search Drilling Down, Curse of Oak Island. They put the episodes up there. And you can, if you have any paranormal stuff you want to talk about or Oak Island question, I think all my social media is at the Matty Blake. That's the MattyBlake, at the Matty Blake, all my social media.
Excellent. Matty Blake, Drilling Down is the show. We're so glad to have had an opportunity to speak with you, and great success with this special.
It was a pleasure, Jim. Keep digging, everybody.
Certainly a very interesting show, and thanks to both Nick and Matty for their time. And we thank you for your time. I hope that you'll tell a friend. We don't have those huge marketing budgets that some of those folks out there have, but what we do have is even more important. We have you, but you have to spread the word. So subscribe a friend, tell them to download Jim Harold's Spooky Studio app, share it on your social media. Please spread the word however you can, because we're relying on you to tell more people about the Paranormal Podcast, and for that matter, the Campfire Show as well, if you have not checked that out. We thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time, and have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.